Curly Howard shot himself when he was 12 years old. It's why he had such an exaggerated walk on stage. Depending on the source, he was either inspecting a rifle or cleaning a shotgun or vice versa, or playing with a pistol in the backyard, and it went off and shot his leg. Everyone agrees it was Mo who got Curly to the hospital to save his leg, but Curly's fear of surgery meant he never got the injury fully repaired. When Curly was 21, he was in a bad car accident. The vehicle he was in crashed into a streetcar and his face was gashed in the crash. This left him with a large scar on his left cheek, which you can see in higher resolution photos. He got his first crack at show business at the age of 25 when he was hired as the comedy conductor of the Orville Knapp Band. The act involved Curly directing the orchestra as he progressively lost pieces of his tuxedo, including his pants. When his older brother Shemp left his Stooges act, Curly joined that at Moe's insistence. At first, Ted Healy, who was in charge of the act at that time, thought Curly, who was then just called Jerome, was too handsome and not funny looking. He had thick black hair and a big curly mustache. I guess hipsters were a thing in the 30s? Curly left the room for a few minutes, came back with a shaved head, and ended up getting the job. It's said that Curly was the shyest of the Stooges, although you wouldn't know it from the movies. His act seemed to mask his self-doubt the same way his goofy walk masked his limp. And that crazy, nonsensical running in circles bit he used to do, that was something he improvised whenever he forgot his lines. Curly took his goofy stooge stage personality out of the studio as well. During his whole career, he never appeared in public out of character. As most people know, the Stooges act was very physical and often violent. Luckily for them, one time in 1934, while filming Three Little Pigskins, the Stooges insisted on stunt doubles as they were to be tackled by an entire football team. And it's a good thing they did, because their stunt doubles ended up in the hospital with broken bones and cracked ribs. But most of the time, they did their own stunts, got their own broken bones and their own cracked ribs. In 1943's Gem of a Jam, Curly was in a hospital bed that was meant to be accidentally tipped backwards. In the industry, they call that Trendelenburg. The gag being that the bed was to almost throw Curly out of a nearby window, but in the stunt, the bed tipped too fast, throwing Curly headfirst into the windowsill. Apart from probably at least a minor traumatic brain injury, the accident left Curly with a huge gash on the back of his head, but he had it sutured up and went right back to work. In fact, most times that the Stooges got injured on the set, they finished their scene. Curly was known as the Fat Stooge, although he wasn't really that fat, especially compared to today's average American man. He was 5'5" and most of the time about 195 pounds, or a BMI of 32. His weight was exaggerated by the fact that he wore suits that were too small when he was in character. He did lead an unhealthy lifestyle though, drinking too much, womanizing, smoking, spending extravagantly, and this was taking its toll by 1945. That year, Mo took Curly to Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara, where he was diagnosed with obesity, a retinal hemorrhage, and severe hypertension. Curly was ordered to take it easy, which led to a slight slowdown in the Stooges' production schedule. And in the meantime, there were women. In August of 1930, Curly married his first wife, Julia Rosenthal, but the marriage was annulled by January of the next year. There's not a lot of history on her. Back in those days, divorce was seen as shameful, hence the annulment, and they didn't have kids. In 1937, he married his second wife, Elaine Ackerman. That marriage lasted until 1940 and produced one daughter, Marilyn. After that divorce, Curly started drinking more to self-medicate his insecurities, and it didn't help him much that he thought his bald head was turning off the women. Mo's son-in-law Norman called Curly a pushover when it came to the opposite sex. His third marriage to Marion Buxbaum lasted from October 1945 through the following July. He married her after knowing her just 2 weeks. The divorce was very nasty and very public. The media had a field day with it, and when it was over, Marion ended up with half of everything Curly had. And meanwhile, his health was in a tailspin. In May of 1946, while filming Half-Wits Holiday, Curly had a massive stroke. He couldn't talk. He just sat in a chair crying. He spent a few months in a hospital in Woodland Hills, California, and meanwhile his brother Shemp came back to the Stooges to take his place until Curly was well enough to continue his career. that never happened. Curly did manage to lose some weight and rehabilitate a bit, and even made a cameo in the 1947 film Hold That Lion, which was the only clip to feature all three of the Stooge brothers, Moe, Shemp, and Curly. He tried to make a comeback for the movie Malice in the Palace playing a chef, but he wasn't well enough to continue, so the casting was changed and his scene was lost to history on the cutting room floor. Meanwhile, he married his fourth wife, Valerie Newman, in 1947 and had another daughter, Janie, in 1948. But shortly after Janie was born, Curly had another massive stroke, this one leaving him partially paralyzed. By 1950, he was confined to a wheelchair and his condition never improved. He was in and out of hospital as his wife Valerie stayed with him, taking care as much as she could, until February of 1951 when Curly was admitted to a nursing home because of his deteriorating health. A month after that, he had another massive stroke and was moved to the Hollywood Hospital and Sanitarium. On January 18, 1952, Curly died of a massive cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 48. Sadly, despite all his fame and success, he left very little money behind for his widow and daughters, and it was revealed later that Moe had talked the ailing Curly into signing away all his rights to the Stooges Act. Many people think it was just a matter of protecting the act versus doing something malicious, because Moe tended to take pretty good care of his brother, but Curly's widow Valerie ended up suing Moe in 1960 for the $450,000 she felt the Stooges owed Curly. Incidentally, Curly's last wife Valerie also died young in 1962 at the age of 47. But all that yucky water seems to be under the bridge, as they say. Curly's second daughter, as well as his 4 grandchildren, and Moe's son, daughter, and grandchildren enjoy their legacy and get together to celebrate the Stooges to this day. I'm Christopher, you're great, thanks for watching. Don't forget to enjoy the journey.